watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. You are weary. Come home, earnestly, tenderly. Jesus
Hey everybody, we're going to get started. First, I'm going to open up open up Facebook on Saginaw Church of Christ so I can see your comments. Hopefully this will work out right. I usually do it with Saginaw news and announcements, but we're going to try this real quick. It's good to see all of you online at least, and I'm looking forward to next week when we actually get to meet in person. I'm very excited about that. It's been quite a bit. Not quite as long as it was before, but you just miss everybody when you don't get to see people in person. It's not the same. It's fine. It's okay, but it's not the same. And so I'm going to open this up so we can see what everybody has to say. I see everyone hopping on, saying good morning. Good to see all of you. Janet, Esther, Daryl, a bunch of folks hopping on right now. Yeah. Oh, I can't see that far. That's too little for me to look at. Let me get on here. Let me see if I can. I can look at this. Oh, I can't see that far. That's too little for me to look at. Let me mute this. Let me get on here. Okay. Hopefully the comments will come up here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. There we go. There's the comments. Sally, good to have you. All of you folks here today. Juanita, Jean, Bonnie, Catherine, Loretta. Great to have you here, Loretta. Okay. We are going to start. So it was interesting. I thought about what to do with this particular class because I was going to start a series on what is your life, kind of reevaluating life after this past year and what it meant. And Jeff, good to have you here too. Greens and Lowry's, good to see y'all. And I thought, I've only got 1 week until we do live, and Jeffrey is going to take over and finish his Romans class. And so I thought, well, what do I do? Well, okay, so let's just focus on the first class that I was going to do on what is your life. And it was, what is your life? A vapor. And it's from James chapter 4. If you want to turn there, we're going to be studying from there today. And part of what James 4 does is it talks about tomorrow. It talks about boasting about tomorrow. And I've always thought as I read this scripture that it was talking about the brevity of life. That you can't assume that life is forever. And I do believe that. I believe that very much, that life is not forever, that it's a lot shorter than we think, that we can't just assume that everyone that we love is always going to be there. I've always been that way. I'm always one of those that I feel the need to tell everyone I love them in my household before I go anywhere, just in case, even if it's just to Aldi, because you just never know. But at the same time, I've accepted that. I've accepted that life is short. I think I've had it down pretty well. I've faced mortality a few times. I could probably learn more about that. I don't want to learn more about mortality anytime soon. Bobby, hello from the sound room. Thank you, sir. Good to have you with me. Very good, since you're keeping me running. Donna, good to have you. You and Charles, good to see y'all. And so when we think about the brevity of life, that is a good point, a valid point, but I don't think that's all that James is saying in this passage. And we're going to go ahead and read it. James chapter 4, starting in verse 13. And James is kind of one of those that likes to preach a little. I appreciate James for that. We would have some things in common. He'd probably get on to me a lot, and that's okay, but I do think that we have that in common, that we like to preach. And he says this, "Come now, you who say, Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that, but now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. And as we break this down, I want us to talk about a few things that James points out. The first thing he says is, when you say, today or tomorrow, this is what we're going to do, you're saying that with certainty. You're saying, this is our plans tomorrow, and they're not going to change. We're making a statement of certainty about how our lives are going to be run. And let's take aside the idea of life simply being brief. Instead, let's look at this as a brief window of opportunity. And specifically, this is a window of opportunity to make a decision about how we spend our lives. If you take every chunk of your life, every day, every year, and you think about it in monetary terms, how you spend your life, then you have to realize that the way that we spend our lives is not something arbitrary that we can simply say, oh, well, I'm just going to do this day, do this and that day. It is actually taking a part of your life and investing it in something. Kathy, I see you and Bill are on. Welcome. Don and Mary are here. Good to see y'all. And when you choose to spend your life on something, you have a limited resource. You have a limited amount of life to spend. That means that it has great value. After all of us, we don't know how much we have to spend. It's not simply that I have this day to do as I please. It's that I have a certain number of days. I don't know that number of days, but I have to choose very carefully how I spend it. Why? Because there's going to be a point where I don't have any more. And it's not to speak of brevity. It's simply to speak of value. What kind of value does your life hold? What kind of value do you put into your time and into the way that you spend your time here on earth? What he's saying is that the people who boast about what they're going to do with their lives, without considering that window of opportunity or how precious the gift of life truly is, then they're boasting in arrogance because they assume that their life, first of all, is theirs to spend, that they have full ownership of their lives. So even a person who doesn't believe in God or Jesus, who gave that person life? Who granted that person life? Anybody have an answer? For all people, everywhere who's ever lived, who gave that person life? I think the answer is obvious. If God created all of us, that means that God is the giver of life. And as such, all lives belong to God. Now, human beings don't get this. The rest of creation does. A bunny is a bunny. Lives like a bunny, dies like a bunny. A bunny does exactly what a bunny is supposed to do. A dog or a cat is a dog or a cat, and they're going to be a dog or a cat regardless of what we just think we can do with these animals or what they might get in their heads that they're going to do. A cat cannot be a chicken. A cat cannot be a dog. A cat cannot be a cow. You could train it or teach it to act in different ways than it was made to act, but it's still going to be a cat at the end of the day. That animal was created for a specific purpose. That animal was created to do a specific thing. And that animal is going to do what animals do, regardless of how we train or teach them. Because that's what they're made to be. Human beings were created in the image of God. That means that there is a built-in purpose for humanity. We are created to uphold God's image. Did you ever think about that? It's not simply that this is the way in which we're made. This is why we're made. We're made to be in God's image. We're made to reflect the greatness of God's glory. People talk about, humans are kind of trash and scum. Humans are God's image. They're not trash or scum. I mean, even angels weren't created in such a way, at least not that we know of. Because they have a limited amount of choice in which they can do things. We're told that salvation is something even angels desire to look upon. And they have a choice to a degree, because we know that certain angels chose to defy God. Humans are made in God's image, imago Dei. They're made to resemble God, and therefore they already have a built-in purpose when they first take their breath on earth. They're there to resemble and reflect and bring knowledge of God's image. You see it in our love. Even people who have no idea about Jesus or God have a capacity to love. That doesn't mean they do, but they have a capacity to love in an unselfish manner. We see it in parents often. We see it in children sometimes. We see it in people on occasion. Why is it so inconsistent? Why are people hateful and mean and bitter? Why are there parents who abandon their own children? Because even though we were created in God's image, even though we were given life and given a certain amount of life, each one of us, we have squandered what God gave us. We've taken the image of God and we've defiled and corrupted it to where it no longer resembles God at all, but it resembles something wicked and evil and perverted and corrupt. That's why God chose to send Jesus before the foundation of the world to redeem sinful humanity. And I think part of our problem is that we try and look at God and we try and imagine what He's like through our corrupt vision. And we think that the plans that we have and the things that we choose to do somehow will align with what God thinks without further reflection. And so the hypothetical man here, or woman, who says, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make profit, and does not think for a moment about how their time is built into their innate purpose to live and to glorify God as image bearers of God's greatness. He says it is not only arrogant, but it is wicked. It is evil, he calls it. And yet we look at it and we say, look how brief life is, so we've got to live for God in the moment. That's not all that he's saying here. He's saying, now wait a second. If you're going to determine the way that you spend your life, then the first thing that you ought to do is consider the fact that you don't know what will happen tomorrow. You're not omniscient. You just don't know. Your life is short, and what that means is that you have a small window of opportunity to fulfill the purpose given to you by God, which is to reflect His image. And therefore, we ought to consult God if we are to consider what we ought to be doing. Why? Because He gave us life. Because it belongs to Him already. But especially for those who were born into Christ Jesus through baptism, to those who were immersed once again in the waters of baptism and the blood of Jesus to be sanctified and to be cleansed, we're told that those who are called according to His purpose are justified and sanctified and will find glory in God. There's already a purpose built in. There's already a purpose made for us who are in Christ Jesus. God already has a plan for your life. So before you make plans, recognize that His plan is ongoing and His plan trumps anything that we decide to do. It doesn't matter how many plans we have. God directs our steps. God's the one who allows us to breathe in air. He's the one who gives us life. He's the one who sustains life. And therefore, before we make any decision or make any plans, we ought to say, first and foremost, well, whose time is this? Who does it belong to? And for what purpose do I live? I think that's part of the problem that James has, is that people don't really understand why they live. After this year, after all the suffering that people went through. Richard, good to have you here today. I think a lot of people need to take a step back and say, well, what is life really supposed to be about? Is it about survival? I think for some that has been the case. The whole idea of not getting sick, not getting COVID, a very good idea, by the way. I had it and I don't recommend it. And the people who have died from COVID, and it scares us. I think of my own family. I don't want to lose anyone in my family. Don't want to lose anyone close to me. Some people already have. I've lost some people. Maybe you have too. And yes, it made me think about mortality. And yes, it made me think about the brevity of life. But more than anything, it's asked me, well, what is life really about at all? What is it supposed to be about? Is it about my plans? Is it about my comfort? Is it about simply surviving? Or is it something better? Something higher? The hypothetical man or woman says, my life is about my plans. My life is about bettering myself for myself. My life is about what I envision it to be. And I'm not saying that it's bad to make plans, not at all. We all make plans. We all have dreams. What I'm saying is that the first thing I ought to consider is what my life is really all about. What purpose my life serves. Am I here to fulfill myself, to meet all of my goals and needs? Am I here to survive? Am I here to thrive financially? Am I here to thrive socially? Am I here to meet some important landmark that will bring me satisfaction? And the answer to all of those is no. You are here to reflect God's image. And that is your sole purpose. Whatever else we plan is secondary to that goal. And if we ever forget that, then the losses seem that much harder for us. Then the hurt is all the more deep. Why? Because the people that I've lost this year, they loved Jesus. They wanted to be in heaven with Him. They longed to be in His presence more than they longed to be here on earth. The people that I lost, they understood the purpose for which they lived. Do any of us know it fully? No. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Do we ever get selfish? Absolutely. Do we ever waste some time? Yeah. But they didn't forget their purpose. And I know that what happened when they left this world was a step in the right direction. You say, well, what are you saying? That it was good that they died? No, but it's good that they live now. It wasn't good for me that they died. I hurt. I suffer still. I miss them. But part of the reason I miss them is that this world is sad. This world's depressing. Just look around you. Look at the pain and the suffering that people go through. It's not a pleasant thing. It's not a great thing when you look at this world. It's easy to get depressed. It's easy to get downtrodden. It's easy to look at everything going around us and say, Lord, just come, please. This is terrible. But we have to be reminded that there's a purpose for being on earth. There's a purpose for still being here. Paul went through it a bit when he said, look, my desire is to go and be with the Lord, but it's more helpful that I'm here. I've got a reason to be here. I've got a purpose. And life isn't all bad. Look, even with loss, even with suffering, life isn't all bad. Life can be so great. And that's the funny thing, is life can be bitter and sweet, can it? You can have the greatest joy and the greatest sorrow all at the same time, but it makes sense when you have the right purpose, when there's a reason to live. What is your reason to live? What is your purpose? Not the one you say because it's the right answer, but the one that you live out every day. What is the purpose that you are living for? What is the thing that drives every decision that you make? The hypothetical man or woman says, it's all about me. It's all about my plans. It's all about what I want. But the Christian says, I've already made the decision. My life is not my own. My existence is now in the hands of God. He's the one that will give me joy. He's the one that will comfort my sorrow. He's the one that will enrich my life. He's the one that will help me make the very best plans. And He's the one that sometimes will take my plans, rip them up, throw them away, and say, I've got something better in store for you. Even when we think, oh, how could it get any worse? It's really good to have you here today. And so the first question we have to ask is, what is our life for? Why are we living? To glorify God, to love others, to enrich the lives of those around us, to be enriched by God's Spirit and by God's Word, to find peace that can't be taken from us, joy that remains, hope that is a certainty, love that is unconditional and unparalleled and cannot be measured, faith that moves mountains. These are the reasons for which we live. This is the purpose that we have in life. If there's any other purpose or reason, we're not going to be happy. There are a lot of people that aren't happy in this life. I was reading about a newscaster that was New Year's Eve, and he got drunk and he started just raving at everybody. I mean, this is national news. This is a guy who people watch, millions of people watch all the time, and he's sitting there drunk, raving about Mayor de Blasio, raving about everything. And they thought it was funny. They thought it was a joke. I'm thinking, this is sad. You know, some people, their lives are just a wreck. And they triumph in it. They glory in it. And I'm not beating them down. I'm not saying, what terrible people. This is the world. The world is going to be the world. I'm saying, look, there are a lot of people who have absolutely no purpose in life because they haven't found the one purpose that God gave them. There are not a multitude of purposes for which we live. There is only one, and if you don't find it, you'll be in misery. Sure, we can have sort of animated, fake happiness. We could try and content ourselves with that our whole lives, but there is no feeling like that feeling when you know God, when you serve God, when you love God, and you are loved by your church, when you're loved by Jesus. There's no feeling. You cannot artificially create it. And people try to artificially create that feeling all the time. Through sex, through drugs, through alcohol, through money, through fun experiences, through meditation. But when you're cradling your child who died in your arms, when you're saying goodbye to your parents, when you lose your spouse or one of your loved ones, or when someone is in the hospital with COVID and you can't see them, all of those artificial things quickly dissipate. And what you're left with is this question: is it for something? What's it for? What is life about? He goes on here. Nita, Sarah, good to have you here with us. He goes on and he says this. Verse 14 of James 4, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. It's not merely brevity. It's that fast moment of decision. That quick decision. It seems like we have plenty of time to decide. Do I serve God? Do I step up and live for God? That's going to be the title of my sermon today, by the way, a little preview. Do I live for something higher than the plans I make for next week or next month or next year? Do I really want God in my life? Do I love God more than anything else and anyone else? Do I really seek heaven? Is it really what I dream about, or is it just something flowery that I talk about to make me feel better when I'm lost and discouraged? That moment of decision is everything, isn't it? I think about engagement when the man, sometimes a woman, gets on one knee and they say, will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life with me? It's a big moment, isn't it? You can say no. I think it's so sad for the guy when he proposes to the girl it's on the Jumbotron, at a game of some kind. And she says no. I watched a video of that. I'm like, I don't want to laugh, but that is just sad. I mean, terrible. He basically embarrasses himself in front of the whole world because she says, no, I don't want to marry you. And if you want to boil life down to a moment, it's when God says, will you follow me? And it's not just a one-time question, it's an ongoing question. Just like marriage, through thick and thin, through up and down, through rich and poor, for better or worse, will you follow me? It's a question Jesus asked the apostles. Every one of them said yes. Did they mean it? They had to think really hard about that question. Did they mean it when Judas betrayed him? Did they mean it when they said, we'd die for you, we'd never leave you? And yet, in that moment when he was arrested, every one of them fled. Did Peter mean it when he said, Lord, I'll never deny you? And then before the rooster crowed, he denied him 3 times. And sometimes I wonder, do we really mean it? Do we mean it when we say, this moment, God, I'm all in, I'm all yours, it's everything to me? And I think we have to be in that moment and to say, Lord, I really mean it. And you have to be in that moment every day. It's not a one-time decision, it's an ongoing decision. Much like marriage, you can have the most beautiful, wonderful marriage. You can spend $100,000 on it and get the horse and carriage and get the balloons and get everything all set up. And you have this wonderful, beautiful day and you get all these pictures and you owe all these people money. And then day 2, you walk out the door. It's completely possible. And what he's saying is, in a moment you have a choice. And you have to choose. You can't say, give me some more time. Because he says, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The window of opportunity, the window of choice is minuscule. Because we fool around with sin and we fool around with this world and we fool around with what we want and what we desire. And our arrogance and our foolishness gets in the way of all of these good things. But the whole point of it is, do I say yes? Do I follow God? Do I abandon all else for Him? Why is it so hard to say yes to God? If you want to comment, you can. Why is it so hard to say yes to God? Anybody? Why is it so hard to say yes to God in that moment? Because I think when you're at church, it's easy to say yes to God. I think it's easy to say yes when you're baptized. Well, not always, but that moment when you say, I'm going to give my all, it's easy enough. But why in the moment of indecision is it hard to say yes to God? What makes it hard for us? Anybody have an answer? Because let me tell you, if you have an answer, I'd like to hear it. Because sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I don't know why. Daryl says we're selfish, yeah. Because I'm thinking more about me and about my life and about my plans and about my glory and about my wants. And the thing is, if you really want to do something for yourself, Richard says change. Yeah, it's hard to change. It's hard to get out of old ways. That's why the window of opportunity is so small. Because that moment when you can change, it doesn't always come very often, right? That moment when you can make that step in the right direction. Because it's small steps that lead us to heaven. It's not just the big step, it's small steps. Small steps that we take every day. Why else is it so hard for us to say yes to God in that moment of indecision? Donna also said we're selfish. Why else is it so hard in that moment of indecision to say, yes, I'll follow you. Wherever you want, I'll follow you. Satan is strong and he hits us at our weakest. Yes, Mary, that's true. Uncertainty, Bobby said. I think part of it is that we have an image in our heads of what life is supposed to look like. We have an image of the way things are supposed to go. And in our arrogance and in our hubris, we really believe that this is what life is supposed to be. And a lot of times, it's simply that we're uneducated. Not because we haven't read, not because we don't know in our heads. It's because we're uneducated because we don't stand in the presence of God. We're not standing in the counsel of God. Psalm 1 says, blessed are those who do not stand in the counsel of the wicked or seat in the counsel of the scornful. But their delight is in the law of the Lord. Why? Because when you stand in the counsel of God, God will give you an image and a vision that's clear and precise. And yes, there's times, as Mary said, that Satan knows our weaknesses and can get to us. But the thing is, we're daily making a decision to follow Jesus. We're daily making a decision to get in the right path. And so many times when we're off course, we realize what we're losing, and that window of opportunity starts to close, and we say, no, I want to follow you, God. I want to return to you. And I guarantee you we're going to have moments when we have to come back. But while we have the moment to seize, let us seize it, lest we lose our opportunity. He goes on to tell us this. Philip says, because we don't want to fail God. Yeah, sometimes we worry about that. And we struggle about not living up to his expectation. I think about the 1 talent and the 10 talent and the 5 talent, or the 1, the 2, and the 5 talent man. And the 1 talent man said, well, I knew, Lord, that you reaped where you didn't sow and all this, so I hid the money. And the great thing is that the perfect love casts out fear. We don't have to be afraid because God is patient and loving and forgiving and willing to help us, keep us from failing. So we go on and we read in verse 15, instead of saying, today or tomorrow we'll go into such and such a place, spend a year there, buy and sell, make a profit. He says in verse 15, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now your boast is arrogant. You boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. Now, this is very easy to dismiss, right? It's very easy to say, oh, it simply means that we say, well, if the Lord wills. It's like a magic indentation. Well, if the Lord wills. And I don't think that's the idea here. He says, say if the Lord wills, but he's not simply saying just add that to whatever your plans are. He's saying to consider very carefully what the Lord's will is. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of introspection, and it takes a lot of thought. Because my life and what my life is requires introspection, requires consideration. I have to think, is my life directed by God's will? And what is His will for me? And I've had that question from a lot of people before. I don't know if I'm doing God's will. And if they're asking that question, they're already on the path towards it because they're considering, is my life according to the will of God? It's when we don't even consider God's will, when we're just kind of going about aimlessly, without direction, without purpose, that's when we really struggle. Because we don't find the goodness of God. We don't find the brilliance of what God is doing in our lives. We miss it. We miss that opportunity. And so he says, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. In other words, we say, all things belong to God. I don't get to choose. So I need to make sure that whatever it is I'm doing is fulfilling what God wants in my life. And that is a tall order. It's not easy. There are days that we don't even consider God's will. There are days that we just kind of live. I think for some people in 2020, they just wanted to get it over with. Just finish it out because this year was so hard. Let's just get through this and then we can have another year. And the answer that God gives is, well, who says you have 2021? Who says there will be a 2021? He says, today, consider my will. Not when things are more convenient, not when things go back to normal, not when things are easier for me, more manageable, but today, what is God's will? And it means that we have to make changes in our lives that we don't want to make. It means that we have to make sacrifices that we don't want to make. It means that we have to forgive people we don't want to forgive. It means we have to do things that are hard, that take a lot out of us. It means that we have to keep going even though we've lost so many people. It means we have to be better because we're God's people. And God expects great things from us. I wouldn't want the opposite. I wouldn't want God to have low expectations. Can you imagine if God just said, I don't really expect much from y'all because you're just sort of average. Average congregation in an average town. Saginaw, Texas. Nobody even knows what Saginaw, Texas is. They think it's Saginaw, Michigan. They don't care about Saginaw. Why should they care about your little church? What if God said that? What if that's the way that God treated us? What if He said, you just live your life however you want. Live what's best for you. Live your best life. Do whatever you want because it's all for you. What if that was God? Just a God who let us do what we wanted and didn't care and didn't think that we could do anything special. Wouldn't that be a disappointing God? Wouldn't that be a terrible God? Our God cares about what we do with our lives. He is invested in us fully. You can't get more invested than sending your son to die. You can't get more invested than creating all the universe so that we might see His glory, even the stars, just to see at night, all of these amazing planets that make us feel small, and yet those things are small compared to the value of the human soul. They're nothing compared to what God did when He sent Jesus to die for us. When we have low expectations for our lives, it's like the person who rejects the offer for proposal in front of the Jumbotron, in front of the world. It's as if God's own beloved says, no, I don't want that life. I just want an easy life. I just want simple. I don't want to do anything special. I just want to be. That's not good enough. It's not simply that it's not good enough for God. It's not good enough for you. You're made for better things than that. You're made for things that pertain to salvation, not things that pertain to this world. You're not made for this world. You're made for heaven. You're built for heaven. You're created for heaven. And so if we lose perspective on that, if we miss that huge goalpost that's right in front of us, if we miss that opportunity, that window of opportunity that God has given, yes, your life is a vapor. Yes, it's short. But the point is that right now is your moment. So say yes. Embrace God. Give everything you have to fulfilling His will. And don't make any plans until you've decided that those plans are worthy of God's attention and have God's approval and God's input. Because I don't know about you, but when I make plans for myself without God, they never turn out the way that they should. Because they're not the right plans if they're not God's plans. This is what he ends with. Verse 17, therefore to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him, to her, it is sin. Do you know what that means? That it's the window of opportunity of today that we must take and do good in the household of God. Whatever situation we're in, whatever we're facing, whatever else is pressing around us, we must choose to do God's will today. And it can't simply be something we say. It has to be something real that we can touch and feel and see. It has to be something that we do in this life now. And if we do, the promise is that that vapor, that small window of opportunity becomes for us a heavenly reward that lasts forever. Let's start 2021 in a way in which we say, God, today, may your will be done in my life. Choose what to do with me and do it, and I will follow. Let us say yes to God and no to this world and no to our own plans so that God's plans might be fulfilled in us. We're about out of time. In about 15 minutes, we're going to have worship. Thank you so much for your attention. God bless you, and may our lives be worthy of the plans that God has made for us.